This episode is powered by Mod 42. Their modular approach represents the future of data center infrastructure. By combining innovation, design with cutting-edge technology, they deliver scalable, efficient, and sustainable solutions that transforms how businesses deploy and manage their computing resources. Welcome to Beyond the Megawatt. I'm Valerie Crafton, Risk and Site Strategist. I'm joined by my co-host, Mara Irvin, reuse expert and real estate visionary. Together, we are the Data Center Darlings. We're spotlighting the voices and ideas powering digital infrastructure's future. Let's dive in and go beyond the megawatt. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Megawatt. We have two really special guests, and they audaciously call themselves experts in sustainability. I'll let them talk a little bit more about what they mean by that, because I think they'll agree that no one really is an expert in this. We're all kind of on the verge of first of a kind and figuring it out together. So welcome, Catherine and Charlie, to Beyond the Megawatt. And of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Mara Irvin. Let's jump right in. We'll start with you, Charlie. Tell us a little bit about your human story, that moment you decided to make sustainability your brand.
So, it's funny, the expert comment you made. I can't remember if it was Plato or Aristotle that famously said, the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. Uh, I feel like that sometimes. And I think, my own journey into this space is a unique one for those who don't know me. I don't have any background formally in sustainability whatsoever. I got my undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Arts in physics, and that just means it happened at a liberal arts school. So I was taking physics at the same time as theater and history and all those fun topics. I had a bit of a unique flow into my current role of both an author of this climate optimism book called What We Can Do, A Climate Optimist Guide to Sustainable Living, as well as my current, day job of being a director of sustainability for Microsoft's cloud operations group. But my journey into the space was a fun one where I looked across my old job and saw nobody really doing sustainability, or at least wanting to own it. And so I was in charge of an events portfolio. I was just a guy getting people together to talk about things. And then I realized, wait a second, if no one's telling me I can't make them talk about sustainability, I'm going to make them talk about sustainability. Let's just see what happens. And so, building from a completely different business background, layering sustainability over the top of it, and doing that for 3 years, I kind of accidentally built my brand into, well, maybe not accidentally, but somewhat surprisingly built my brand into being the sustainability guy at my old company. And that brand carried with me until one of my clients just happened to be at Microsoft and said, "Hey, I like how you represent sustainability for your company. Do you want to come work for mine?" So that was 5 years ago. And I guess now, to kind of the short version of the long answer of my question of, Val, how are we experts? Great question. It's only really happened over the last 5 years that I've become a true sustainability professional. But a lot of the rest of it was just making it a part of my brand, making it a part of my job. And so many people in this space have gone on a very, very similar journey as I am, which should be really empowering to those listening, that you don't have to have a PhD in this stuff to get involved.
I love that. And that's such a really great point, because so often we think it's too late. It's too late to make a pivot. It's already completely inundated, or I need to have a background or a degree or something in this. But sometimes passion drives everything, right? But let's talk about those who were intentional. Catherine, that brings me to you, your round trip back to sustainability and what changed between your early career and today, and how you ended up being, this expert in sustainability. And I know you famously said to me once before, you really call yourself an expert because you want to get the questions. Uh,
Mhm.
let's talk about your journey. How'd you end up here?
Thank you, Val. Thank you, Mara, for having us here. I was hell-bent on a career in sustainability when I was in college. My very first encounter with reality in the professional world just completely crushed me. It was two extremes. Either I met people who didn't care at all, or I met people who were so into it that it was just it was a competition who could be more sustainable. And neither of these things really felt good to me. So I just went straight into business, accounting, finance roles, later program management. I did my rounds. I did my rounds around the corporate environment, and I left sustainability behind me, except personally. It was always a part of my personal life. But then I had a pivot in my career, or an opportunity to pursue something different. I wrapped up a role that I had been doing, and it was kind of like, what do I do now? And a friend said, well, why don't you check with the sustainability team? And I'm like, why don't I do that? So I checked in. I'm going to give props to Linnell Cameron, who was VP of Sustainability at Autodesk at the time, and a maverick in the sustainability world. And she offered me a role. I think she could see that passion, but I think she also saw that I had over 20 years of diverse corporate experience. And so it helped me bring something to the sustainability team that they were lacking, because it was more leaning towards those career professionals, sustainability professionals. And I think for me, the thing that turned me around is I now knew how to handle the human element. It was really the human element that turned me off in the first place. It was understanding how to meet people where they are and help them on this journey that really brought me back to the table and convinced me I can do something here.
As we're talking about, lessons in the industry, I come from the construction industry. And, when we started talking about sustainability, we immediately talk about, I think about LEED, right? And, a lot of our data centers are LEED certified. And so that's where we immediately start. That's where my mind automatically goes from a sustainability perspective, was all the LEED certifications and the big, push for that very early on for everyone to get certified, or at least to have at least one certified person on our job sites. Outside of, that, I mean, have you all run into, other lessons within the history of sustainability and its origin up until today, even from like a non-sustainable role, that makes it better to work in now?
Well, I'll happily chime in on this one. Is Something that I think has been a really helpful evolution of sustainability in the construction space and really in corporate America writ large is it's kind of growing up in a lot of ways. It's made it through its tantrum phase, for the most part. It's kind of making it through its weird, gangly teenage years. And I'll explain what I mean by this is prior to the turn of the 2020s, there wasn't really a uniform, consistent definition of what it really meant to do sustainability in so many ways. For some people, it was energy efficiency. For some people, it was LEED, like you said. For some people, it might have been kind of water conservation. And then a lot of the people working in sustainability were oftentimes sustainability activists first, and professionals, corporate professionals second. Not everybody, but I think that the early wave was about people making the rallying cry to be heard and saying this is something we should prioritize, this is something that the company should care about. And then in the 2020, like almost every company and their mother said, we hear you, we're gonna follow you, we're gonna make these big commitments. And then all of a sudden you saw big company after medium company, and now small company making their own sustainability commitments, starting to organize around a lot of the same language as well. And that standardization around some of the language has been really helpful for the interoperability of sustainability programs across so much of the industry. That's been really fun. And then with that, once you've kind of standardized on the metrics that you're really going for, in my world, metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, total amount of water withdrawal, water use, amount of waste diverted, then you can start to optimize against those metrics. And that can be really fun, because now you can treat it like a business program and not a passion project that you're trying to push through like uphill, like Sisyphus with your big stone kind of going uphill. Somehow Sisyphus made it to the top in some regards of getting to the next phase of the even bigger hill. But that's cool, because now we're at this. By the way, I'm just going to keep throwing like Greek mythology at you guys and see what happens. But now it's professionalized. Now it's more grown up, and now it has access to so much more of the scale and the capital to grow these really, really interesting solutions And in my mind, it makes it a lot more fun and optimistic to work in this space, more so than ever before, I would say, in the history of humanity when it's focused on sustainability specifically.
Mhm. I would add to that answer that we've learned that we really have to consider sustainability at the very earliest stages of a project if it's going to, if it's going to be cost effective. A lot of the reasons why early sustainability in the built environment was shunned is because it was usually too late in the process to make the kind of changes that needed to be made to make the building more sustainable. And so people would abandon it because change at that point in the project, it's too costly. So we've learned that we need to move sustainability further upstream into the earliest design phases. But then we learned we can't do it because we don't actually know enough about what we should choose early in the design phase to result in that more sustainable building downstream, because there's so many unknowns early in the design phase. So the struggle right now is getting as much good data as possible about the full building life cycle so that we can make better choices early on. And wrangling with all of that data and all that variability, AI is definitely going to be a part of sustainability's future.
But now we have to create that loop, continuous loop throughout the project. So maybe can we take a little deeper dive into the, like, how do we keep that loop going? Because it's a constant process of getting line of sight of actually when we can incorporate sustainability. But some of the things that we've actually seen, we've actually had some other episodes on this. It does sometimes show up later on in the project. So how do you kind of stay ahead of that? How can you start that communication with internally across the ecosystem?
I would say accountability across the life cycle of a building construction project changes hands so many times that you're not necessarily getting all the voices you need at every step of the process. One of the things that building certifications look for, at least I know Green Globes does, is do you have that integrated management team involved all the way from pre-construction and design through the end of the project? Because it recognizes that unless you have all voices at the table, you're not going to hear what you need to hear when you need to hear it. So voices would come into the process late because it was the first time they had an opportunity to weigh in. And then it would be deemed infeasible or unfeasible at those points in time. So I think accountability is one of those things that cause that, Val.
So do you think that's just bringing those folks into the conversation earlier if we're considering it, or how do they push themselves into that conversation earlier?
One of the things that I think, we might talk about later as well in terms of measurements in this space is total cost of ownership in the construction process. Everyone holds dear their own bottom line, right? And so we're very used to managing costs in the construction project. Owner to the architect to the engineer to the GC to the sub. Everybody's protecting their little slice of this. We need people to look at total cost of ownership so that we can recognize that a voice in different parts of that is going to affect this bigger metric, this bigger total cost of ownership metric than just what's happening in their slice of the project.
And to add to that, I think I talked about the interoperability, the new language, if you will, of sustainability that really started standardizing across the industry in like 2020 or so, which is this metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. But it's also the expansion of the accountability and the language of the greenhouse gas protocol. So for the listeners who might not understand or might not be following the details of how carbon is accounted for, personally, I think carbon accounting is super fun and just a great time. But I'm also a guy that enjoys doing my own taxes. So like I'm probably in the minority. But for those of you who are still with me and haven't shut off yet, there's three kinds of scopes of emissions. When in the earlier days of emissions accountability, it was often focused on what we call scope 1 emissions, which are often the fuel that you're burning on site. Like if you have a shuttle running between your two buildings, the gas used at that shuttle. and something called scope 2 emissions, which is the electricity associated with or the emissions associated with the electricity of your building. So you could do efficiency efforts, things like LEED help to reduce some of the overall energy burden, but a lot of the early conversations were focused on the efficiency of the energy and maybe the source of the energy being clean. But then here comes scope 3. Scope 3 is everything else. Scope 3 is the embodied carbon of the buildings. It's the supply chain going into all of the construction. It's all these other elements that factor in and make you have to think of not just the total cost of ownership more holistically from a cost perspective, but also from an emissions perspective. So when your only goal is to reduce the emissions of your energy usage, it's understandable that you'd come in late in the game because, it's like, okay, I'll just buy some clean energy and then we're fine, and then no more work needed. But now it's like, if I'm accountable for how much emissions is in the steel of this building, is in the concrete of this building, then you have to pull those conversations way up front to really think holistically. It's like, okay, if we're going to design this thing to be low emissions, accounting for everything, that's a new conversation. That's a different conversation.
Yeah. And I think what we saw too with scope 3 is it got everybody in the ecosystem involved. Like all the OEMs were starting to task our suppliers and across the supply chain. And now it's becoming more relevant. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that I saw when scope 3 really came into part of the program.
Oh, yeah. And to add to that very quickly is, and I talk about this in my book, which I didn't flash it up, and I don't know if it's going to be blurred out. It probably is. But yeah, anyway, this little book that I wrote, I really delve into why this is so important from the perspective of a normal person using a computer. And I started my time at Microsoft leading sustainability for the devices part of the consumer hardware part of the business. And when I came in, I was very curious. I said, what is the carbon footprint or what is the emissions profile of a computer? And you might expect that most of the emissions comes from using the thing, maybe shipping it to get to your door, but it's like 80% of the emissions come from making it. And all of a sudden, it's not just the fact that we're accounting for more, it's that the bulk of so much of the issue can be really found upstream. It totally changes the language of how you solve some of these problems. So when I came in, we went kind of away from saying, okay, let's just focus on what we can do in Windows and make things more energy efficient. It's like, now we need to think about maybe we make these things more repairable so they can last longer, and that'll help kind of with the emissions of making it in the first place. Let's think about recycled materials. And it's so fun to, like, once you're enabled with this new set of information, it changes the profile of it. And I call it the make it, move it, use it, lose it framework in the book, just to kind of say, like, yeah, we're used to thinking about in terms of use it and maybe lose it with recycling, but we got to start talking about make it. We got to start talking about move it, and that's got to be up the chain to make it happen.
What's the name of your book, Charlie?
Oh, sorry. What We Can Do, a Climate Optimist Guide to Sustainable Living. Available wherever books are sold.
I love it. I love it. And we will have links to his book in the show notes. So if you're listening, check out the show notes, and we'll have links there to both Catherine and Charlie and his book. Before we start talking a little bit more about impact of sustainability, I want to just, from the human piece of it, we've been talking about the teams, the loops, the scopes, where they come in, how they're late. What's one habit that teams can bring to their teams and say, hey, this is the habit we need to implement to start thinking differently around sustainability?
Yeah, I'll talk about something. I talk about this when I speak on my book often, and I think it's really important. And it goes back to something Kat said earlier on the human side of all of this. Is when we were having our early kind of toddler era sustainability professionals in corporate America, we were having a kind of sometimes more in the tantrum space. A lot of the times we would lead with language around minimization and about reduction. Saying like, you need to take this out of your product because it's bad for the planet, or you need to stop doing this because it's bad for the planet. And we led with so much of this notion of minimized footprint, but like, I don't know if y'all know this, but the notion of your carbon footprint, that's like an oil and gas thing. Like BP came up with that and popularized it. And that was intentionally to put some of the burden on consumers. And that language got into companies where this notion was like, okay, we got to do less, we got to do less, we got to do less, we got to make our products worse because it's better for the planet. That language is not exciting to get people on board to do this. And so much of the work has to happen with like people, all of your coworkers. It's not just the one or two sustainability folks you might be working with on a daily basis. So, this notion of getting people excited and having them find joy in the work was so important for my own journey in this space, and translating this notion of like, hey, let's stop focusing on minimizing impact or minimizing footprint. Let's start focusing on maximizing impact. And it might be the same management actions, but it's a much more fun and joyous way to do it. Like, instead of saying, hey, the next time you design a mouse, take everything out you can possibly take out, make this thing, as low carbon footprint as possible by removing the track or the spinny wheel, removing some of the casing, blah, blah, blah. Or you can take the opposite approach of like, hey, I'm going to dump a bunch of ocean plastic on your table. This stuff is gross. It sucks. It smells awful. It's deteriorating. It can't keep a constant color. Can you make a mouse out of this? And that's such a more fun problem to work on. And honestly, like at my company, the first thing I told my new team is like, hey, my number one priority is we have to have fun on this team and other people have to have fun with us. And that's so much more around managing and getting people excited to be on the journey rather than feeling shamed into participating.
I think that would be a next good book title for you, Charlie. How to Find Joy in Total Cost of Ownership.
I love that. Catherine, what about you? I mean, we've talked about, what daily habits. You've talked a little bit about some of the daily habits already, but any one thing that kind of stands out to you in that regard?
Mm-hmm. So I think for me, one of the easy ways to break into the thought process of sustainability is really to liken it to our financial systems and our transactional systems. There is this new accounting, carbon accounting, which is coming forward. And when you start to translate this into more of an accounting problem, you realize that you can borrow a lot of things that work for the financial accounting side to the carbon accounting side. And all of us in the corporate world are handling or dealing with transactions. We have budgets that we manage, we get contracts negotiated. Everybody has some part of the financial picture which they touch. I think it's an easy step to just back off from the monetary side of that and now ask yourself, how can I attach sustainability to this transaction? This transaction is going to happen no matter what, but what can I bring to it that adds to this transaction a more sustainable aspect? And that could be carbon, but that could be energy efficiency. That could also be on the social side. Are we working with companies that are trying to achieve more gender balance in the workplace? Are we working with companies who are taking care of their people and prioritize safety? So there are a lot of different ways you can bring sustainability to the work that you're doing.
I think that's a good segue into talking about, change management, in that regard. And where does the change management success, or where does it succeed or fail when companies chase that, less bad versus more good?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what I think Charlie was talking about. Is I think what's left on the table when we focus on less bad is value creation. The more good is really that mindset of, instead of like reducing what I do, how can I do more of what I do, but do it better? And it's a more fun problem to solve. But it's also, from a sustainability perspective, it's the only thing that will really get us out of these holes that we dig for ourselves. Because less bad, when everything is growing, less bad continues to grow too. So like, we started to make progress with renewable energy. It has started to reduce the amount of emissions that we are seeing each year. But what's contributing to emissions now is just the growth of energy that we need. So less bad will actually never solve our sustainability problem on its own. I'm not saying it's not important, but we also have to look at ways to add value to this equation and not just do less bad.
Well,
100%.
Then go ahead, Charlie. Were you going to add to that?
Just a light add to it is, and this is, we promised to give you some spiciness before we started recording the podcast. And so here's my first of the spicy takes, which is morality is not a reason to do something in a company. And I think that's not something a lot of people want to hear, but it is the reality of seeing sustainability grow up in corporate America. Is like, yes, in theory, in a perfect world, we should just do the right thing to do the right thing. And often, and that does happen. I don't want to say it doesn't happen, but so often, to Kat's point, is, tying it to value creation in some way, shape, or form really matures it. And I promised you Greek mythology, so I'm gonna give you even more. Let's talk about the Trojan horse, right? And you don't have to like explicitly slap sustainability on everything, right? You can use a Trojan horse of like efficiency, like we want to reduce our costs, and if we, install all this energy efficient hardware and equipment, that'll reduce our costs. And then once it's in the doors, then you say, haha, it was sustainability all along. But it has to be tied in some way to, I think, making sure that sustainability is a value add to a business, not a thing you have to suffer through as a cost of doing business, except of course we're regulated.
I
And
love
I
that.
just want to add that too. As a developer, I've seen the full life cycle of sustainability from where this little curve where it's this year it's important. This year we don't have time to think about sustainability to fast forward today. I'm seeing it save our projects. And the only way that's even going to happen is being aware. Like what is the technology and innovation that we're doing around reclaiming water or the renewable energy side. So, but I think just education across our entire company ecosystem, not just your sustainability experts, but just those little tidbits of information that I picked up so that when I'm on a call and I hear, oh, we have a problem, can't get water to our site. What options do we have? Or we just don't have enough power. The utility is constrained. What options do we have? And it may have been a sustainability portion of how we could bring that in, but now it's actually saving our projects. And now sustainability should have been important when it wasn't important, but now it's important because it may break or actually give us success to actually getting a project off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would add to, from a development perspective, you have to think about some of our biggest risks in the industry. And one of those is labor. One of those is our supply chain. And I think we're all standing at a brink of a first of a kind where we've never seen it builds and the need it's so high and the need to move fast. The demand is charts at record speeds here. And so we have to start thinking about our construction and innovation, and sustainability becomes a big conversation around that because we've stuck so many of these new ideas on how to do things smarter, how to do things leaner, and attached it to a sustainability solving problem rather than just solving a human problem of a need for labor, or quality, or safety, or any of those other things we're trying to solve, or our supply chain where we've all been stuck with building, a certain way. And now maybe modular's it's been around for a really long time, and yet it seems to be a today solution suddenly. So I'd love to move into some of that innovation conversation. And what do you see as some of the biggest myths still that you're hearing?
With industrialized construction, the selling points historically have always been faster, cheaper. Those opportunities exist with industrialized construction. So too does the opportunity to do things more sustainably. However, this is one of my big sticking points. If we bring our mindset of 3 bids and a buy, this very transactional relationship in the construction world, to industrialized construction, we will not get those better outcomes that industrialized construction can produce for us. So if every transformer you want is going to be different for each data hall and each building, you're never going to maximize the benefits of an industrialized construction approach. You're still going to have schedule delays. You're still going to have cost overruns. And you're also still going to be overbuilding what you need because you're trying to cover all your bases. So it's really about establishing a more partnership approach. Owners are going to have to start trusting their partners in construction instead of passing risk to them. We need to start sharing more information with people that are partnering with us in the construction industry. We need to show what our forecast for demand is going to be, so that our partners can gear up and invest because they know they're going to get that business down the road. They'll invest today to make sure they do that business down the road more efficiently. So we have to get away from this transactional project by project mentality. We have to start forming true relationships of trust and transparency in the construction space in order to really capitalize on innovations like industrialized construction and sustainability.
This episode is brought to you by BCS Switchgear, where power meets precision. From obsolete breakers to the new 15 to 34.5 kV switchgear and low break switches, BCS delivers fast answers and custom engineered solutions that keep mission critical systems online. Charlie, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, just that, this is a really fun time to be in the industry. And I'm just going to be Mr. Fun over here, but I got real reasons to be optimistic. And some people might be like, "Whoa, isn't the planet burning? Shouldn't you be really sad?" No, I'm as optimistic as ever. And it's not just fun to be optimistic; it's also pragmatic to be optimistic, because I think part of this innovation question is because of the growth of the data center industry in particular. There's a lot of capital going into these markets right now, and because there's a lot of capital, that also means that 1% of $100 billion is still $1 billion. That's a lot of money to throw at some of these innovation bets that might make your operations better. And so, like, that's where you're now starting to see all this really cool investment in stuff that would have been total moonshots in the past. I mean, everything from, this administration is very pro-nuclear, and like small modular nuclear reactors powering every building just like next door, like on site. That could be a future that is enabled because of all of the capital flowing into this space. Really interesting stuff happening in battery technology as well, to help avoid outages at a lot of these sites. And hey, guess what? If you have enough influx into the battery technology space to bring those costs down, solar is the best energy source for those batteries in terms of the kilowatt hour cost to it effectively. So all of a sudden, you're doing all these really cool innovations here, there, and everywhere as we search for better ways to run our infrastructure that are just actually accelerating the clean energy transition. And not just that, but also like the clean building transition as well. And I mean, Kat, I know you're a huge fan of cross-laminated timber, but like that's a great example of a building material that is a lot lower carbon footprint compared to traditional steel or concrete. But it's also potentially faster to build with because you don't have to like wait for the concrete to set before then pouring your next batch. So there's like all these fun little things where sustainability is driving value creation. And I love that, Kat, you said that earlier, because that is really what we're seeing happen. It's not a value detractor. It's not something that's getting in the way. It really is making a lot of this stuff possible. And I think that is neat.
Yeah, I just have to piggyback on that. This is an exciting time and an exciting industry to be a part of. If you're working in the digital infrastructure space, we have inexorably intertwined challenges. Climate change is something we're in a race to address. We're also in a race to address the data center capacity that we need. And both of those problems are going to be solved with power, clean power. So, and the capital that's flooding into this space right now is exactly the thing that we need to actually try and advance the technologies that are going to be required to address this. I mean, it's here, it's happening now, and it's happening in the data center industry. We will solve climate change here.
I love that. So I love that we touched on a little bit on heavy timber. It's certainly one that's starting to get some recognition, which I wish would have gotten more recognition a lot sooner. Than we wouldn't maybe have a supply chain wanting to implement it and yet not have the supply chain kind of readily established. I think that goes with a lot of things where we think that this could be the solution, and folks are like, well, the only place I can get it is northwest, and it's all, and I need to build on the East Coast. And you're like, well, the supply chain's there and trying to figure it out. We just need to make that more of a common option for folks. And people think it's like this one for one for concrete versus was what I'm trying to say is a 1-for-1 for concrete or precast versus the heavy timber, but really it actually impacts everything, and it impacts your foundations, it impacts all your civil infrastructure, it impacts your seismic and what you're putting in, it impacts how many people are on the site, how big the cranes you have to bring in. It really, from a cost perspective, you start to kind of add all of that up, and you say, okay, well, a structural worker who's got to come in and hang that heavy steel costs a lot more than a carpenter who's bringing in and connecting the heavy timber options. And so we have to really start to think about all of the parts and pieces that it impacts, and partnership and coming together and really looking at it holistically, total cost of ownership as well, into all of that. And I think it's where we start connecting those dots that we really start to see the value in it all. I don't know.
That was a good point, Val, because I was going to ask the question, Charlie and Catherine, how do we measure this? And to Val's point, as we start to look at not just intrinsic but extrinsic value that these sustainability things bring, how do we measure it? And is there a technology that you would like to see scale that's working that could help us accomplish more of that?
I mean, I can certainly chime in initially. And as I answer, I also want to acknowledge, Val, you made a good point of like, we wish all these supply chains would have built themselves up over the last decade or so. And there's a very famous saying where, like, of course, the best time to have planted a tree is 10 years ago, but the second best time is today. And baby, are we planting trees? And it's so cool because everyone is now coming in, and you've got all these people who have never been sustainability professionals in their lives, just by virtue of wanting to be good business people, now getting to get in on the sustainability game. And the tent keeps getting bigger, even if, it might not seem like that every single day. So then the question then becomes of what is the technology that will really help with common measurement. This is one of the tricky things, is as we have to build out the supply chain for the materials and all of the various pieces of energy, we also have to build out the accounting infrastructure. Now, I'm going back to, I think this stuff is sexy and I might be one of the few, but it's really important is if you are trying to buy a piece of equipment, let's say you're trying to buy a generator, do you know how much carbon is in that generator when you buy it? Oftentimes you don't. And the example I often use is like a diet. So like if you're going on a diet, right now the industry is in a place where if you want to see if you lost weight, you wait until the year is over, and then you retroactively do some proxies to count how many calories, and you basically just weigh yourself at the end of the year, and it's like, oh, okay, shoot, I I backslid a little bit. Versus what we need to be able to do is at every single decision point really see clearly and crisply what is the footprint of the thing that I'm about to buy, so that I can push that forward. There's things called environmental product declarations, which are ways to measure this. There are life cycle assessments, which is kind of the basis of the make it, move it, lose it, use it analogy I use in my book. But so much of the technology is accounting technology and financial accounting technology, which is not sexy to other people, but it's so cool to me because like once we can actually measure this stuff and have that true interoperability, then I can go and say, hey, you 4 suppliers, you have the lowest carbon footprint, and it's verifiable against you all you 3. So I'm going to take your thing. And it's not really all the way there yet. That's my long answer to say, like, we just got to have tech that helps us get better at measuring. Maybe that's a place where AI can help us. Who knows? But I don't know if that was the answer you were expecting, Mara.
No, I didn't expect it to get down to accounting, but no,
I did. I fully expected it to get down to accounting because so often, folks will go and say, okay, let's implement this. And you're like, oh, that was too expensive. It didn't work. And then they throw it to the side, but they never did the parallel cost accounting to say that when this impact happened, was it because that would have been an impact no matter if I had stick built it or done this alternative version. We're not doing parallel estimates. We're not doing parallel studies. We're not collecting the data in parallel and then creating that continuous improvement of learning and passing it on to the next project. We're letting it die on our desktops. where those projects coming in with a phase behind us, we've learned something. It may be a different team, but you've got to get those lessons into that next teams immediately. And you need to be doing those parallel cost studies that really prove that this would have been an impact no matter if we've done it traditional or the more sustainable way, so that we can truly see what the upcharge is, if any, for that matter, to be more sustainable.
Mhm. From a change management perspective, we just keep creeping up the life cycle. And a lot of these, to Charlie's point, a lot of the early data that we had was all backward looking and it wasn't backward looking in a way that you could actually then anticipate what you could do differently to make those numbers change. We're now seeing suppliers being asked to produce EPDs earlier and earlier in our building process instead of waiting to get them after that building's already been turned over and operational. We're now starting to see EPDs coming much earlier. I wouldn't say that design decisions are being made yet based on their impact on embodied carbon, but we're moving up to that. We're getting closer and closer to that. And a big part of that is just we need a lot of EPDs, environmental product declarations, to inform those design decisions. We can't predict without that data. And so no matter how much we'd like to predict the embodied carbon of our building, until we have something to stand on to create those predictions, we're just wishing. So data. It's why iMasons, Charlie can speak to this, one of the big pushes is for especially MEP companies to start generating a lot more EPDs. We need this information. And it's not sexy, except for people like Charlie and myself. But that we're here to help you. Reach out, and we might even be able to show you why it's fun. It's a whole different dimension that you can use to look at what you're doing. I think it's fascinating to see where the carbon is coming from. Steel versus concrete versus resins. It really is interesting. Yeah. So we're moving closer and closer to the point of real impact, but data is one of the most important things we're having to solve right now.
And I
Yeah.
think on top of that, something that's really fun where sustainability is driving an entirely new, innovative conversation in so many ways is for the listeners who don't fully appreciate how crazy cool and complex these EPDs and life cycle assessments are. It's like if you take a product, it's not just saying what is the emissions from using that product. It's what is the emissions of every single thing that went into that product, from the mine of the raw materials, through all of the manufacturing steps along the way to get it to something that you can actually use and put in your building. Whoa, that's crazy. You might have 8 suppliers between the final product and the original kind of mining of the raw materials. And these mechanisms are really attempting to understand what is the true impact of that entire flow. So historically, you might not have a relationship deep into your supply chain because you're only working with a general contractor or your kind of contract manufacturer to handle everything for you. But this now is requiring this brand new look deeper into our supply chains and building relationships with companies you might never have to before, which is really fun. Like, we get to talk to people who own mines. We get to talk to people who are, they're a 10-person shop making lug nuts. But these are the cool conversations that now come to expand. And there's such cool technology to really strengthen the supply chain because of this push for data for sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really good. I think it's really time to transition to a little advice for some of those who are entering into this sustainability as a leader. What's the first 90 days move for a new sustainable leader? What advice would you give?
Well, I can certainly chime in. I mean, first 90 days, of course, it's so important to listen. And I think I've seen this so often is when you're on the outside of a company, it is really easy to criticize why they haven't done something yet. And oh boy, it is so much more complex to do things than I think a lot of folks really give it credit for. So, it's like, oh, why haven't we figured this out yet? It's like, well, the market doesn't exist, and we have to build the market at the same time as figuring out the accounting for it, as figuring out how to procure it and pull it into our standards. So much of it is just listening and understanding kind of the difficulty that gets smoothed over from an external perspective, and come in with grace as well of understanding I'm not here to criticize because we haven't made enough progress, but I'm here to learn what I can do as a new leader to unblock and accelerate our transition to even more impact. We're not here to say we could have done better before. We're here to say we can do better now. So that would be my quick version of that answer.
Yeah. And I'm going to say something very similar. Listen, meet with every stakeholder, internal and external. Don't come in with a point of view or a mission. Just listen to where each person is. Get them to talk to you honestly about their feelings about sustainability. So people are either on board or they are completely detached, and some are hostile. And you're going to have to wrestle with all of those feelings. And again, meet people where they're at, help them to understand why sustainability is something that's going to make their jobs more interesting, more valuable, more fun. But you can't do it if you come into the room with a bias towards morality. You have to do this because it's the right thing to do. That will shut every conversation and relationship down.
So if we moved into a belief that you had 5 years ago, and that's maybe changed for today, what would that be for you?
I spent 8 years in the sustainability team at Autodesk, working with Autodesk's customers in the AEC space, talking to them about their sustainability commitments and what we could do to support them. And I thought I was doing sustainability. About a year and a half ago, I exited the corporate world. I started doing independent consulting. And now I am having more impact than I did in a single month than I feel like I had in 8 years. So that's what's changed for me, is getting so much closer to the real problem and getting closer to the point where a solution is needed than just being an advisor. You have to push your sleeves up and get dirty, I think, in order to really make a difference in the space right now.
I'm going to give you, I promise you, at least some more spice. I'm going to throw some more spice on the table. This is going to be a hot dish by the end of this conversation. 5 years ago, I wasn't in the sustainability field at all. I had kind of made it a part of my old job, but that wasn't part of my title. I was a director of programs. I was putting on events. I think so much of the realization I've had, especially in writing my book and doing all the research for my book and having hundreds of conversations with people wanting to understand how to get more into sustainability, how to make it part of their job, is so many people somehow fail to conceive of themselves living in all aspects of their lives. I've talked to so many people who are like, I do sustainability when I get home from work. And then they kind of close off their mind to the notion that they can do sustainability while they're at work as well. And I think this is kind of born out of a historic approach to environmental activism, which is, we all know the man. We all fight against the man, right? Like that was the mentality. It's like we are on the outside yelling at the man to change. And that's been the fun transition, saying like, wait, what if we become the man? It's like, and once you're or woman, I don't want to totally genderize this, but like, this notion of maybe there's a really powerful way, instead of just protesting on the outside, to change things on the inside. And that is a tough pill for a lot of folks to swallow. I've definitely known folks who say, I refuse to work for any major corporation because I think that all of them are greenwashing and all of them are evil. I'm like, okay, that's great. But if you want to be impactful, this has been that transition. It's like, actually, you should work for the companies that have this huge scope and this huge expanse, because they have the power to like give you the option to make a real difference. And I'm going to tell y'all, people ask me, it's like, oh, if I want to get into sustainability, where should I start? I'm like, you should go work for like British American Tobacco or somewhere. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? I'm like, honestly, the tobacco industry is doing great stuff to try to like revitalize their image. They're focusing a lot on sustainability that you wouldn't expect. And it's a place, because of the sheer scope of how many cigarettes are sold, a chance to have massive impact. But that is a fundamentally different mindset than 5 years ago, where the notion of like even remotely talking to a company like that would have been off the table. So, I can say many things, but that's probably the biggest one, is just there's opportunity for impact everywhere. And being inside the system is one of those ways to do it, even if you disagree with the system that you're already in.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, I've when I woke up one morning and realized data centers became evil overnight. I'm a hippie at heart. I love nature. But to your point, on the weekends, I was out enjoying the hike, enjoying the rivers and the water. So it was finding ways to incorporate sustainability into my projects is definitely more meaningful for me. And it, like you said, just getting excited about that. And for folks that when you start to do your product declarations and you're like, oh, as a company, we're doing these things. It's like, oh, I'm almost an ambassador for sustainability. And this may not even been a part of your role at your company, but it's something that you can be proud of.
Oh, yeah. And if I can quickly quote a number from my book, I had the fun of just figuring out what is the total carbon footprint of a human being over their entire life. And I believe that the answer to that is around 1,200 metric tons over the course of a lifetime. I'm opening my book just to confirm I'm not making that up. But if you think about the work or the impact you can have in the data center space, in the construction industry, you can in a day have more of an environmental impact than in your lifetime outside of the system. That's so cool.
Powerful.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It's really powerful. I mean, even if you go into like the farming industry and you think about the amount of carbon that comes off of a cow farm, for example, and you just cut out red meat a little bit, not completely. I'm not promoting vegan. I'm just saying just cutting out a little bit of red meat out of your life will actually have an impact. So I think if everybody just did a little bit, and it's not about greenwashing, it's not about being a tree hugger, it's about just thinking smarter. I personally think that we should design buildings for sustainability from the beginning, like we do for ADA. I don't think it should be an option or an afterthought. And so then maybe we wouldn't be trying to pay so much for it when it becomes the afterthought, if it just becomes the standard. And then how much greater or how much further we get along, but we're not going to make it a standard overnight. What little thing can we do? And maybe you're in a position in your role to kind of make that little thing come into play in your role. I just sometimes people just get their head down and they do their job, they check the boxes and they go home and they're like, okay, now I can shut my brain down and not think about those things anymore. But there's little things you can do inside work, there's little things you can do inside your projects, there's little things you can do in your everyday life. What are those, and can we create a way to give back? So I think it's time for us to transition into our audacious question. Mara, you want to take it?
We've touched on this a little bit, but how do we stop weaponizing greenwashing?
I don't think any longer there is anything known as greenwashing. I think that everyone who's putting something out there that they're claiming to be more sustainable, even if it falls short of the mark, should be celebrated, should be uplifted for what small part that they've been able to do, because every one of these steps builds on each other, adds to the momentum, builds the visibility. As long as we remain positive and we are making honest efforts, no matter how slight they might be, they are still positive movements forward. So I think we absolutely, as sustainability professionals, have to get away from this notion of green shaming and get behind all of us who are making an impact. I see this on social media all the time, and it's so disheartening. A really cool project that gets talked about on LinkedIn, like doing a mass timber data center. And then there are people there who will say, but you only used it on the office space. You didn't use it around the data halls. And it's like, but you used it and you started working out some of the challenges, and The other thing is there are real people behind every one of these changes. And if you keep shaming the people who are trying, they stop trying.
I love the spicy take there, Kat, and I'll echo a lot of it, which is also just in today's landscape, especially in the United States. Um, Promoting sustainability is its own form of courage. That we have an administration that has shown itself very willing to target individual companies for their actions, and so any company willing to put themselves out there to promote the environmental impact of their work, even if that work isn't perfectly aligned to reality, is still an act of courage. Now, of course, in a dream world, I think we'd all agree that any green claim should be 100% aligned and have no exaggeration in it. Um, but it feels like if you're looking at the various problems that we need to solve first, I think we need to not completely kill the category demanding perfection over progress. And instead celebrate, exactly as you said, Kat, celebrate the progress that's happening in the right direction, even if it's not all the way it needs to get to yet. Because even though it feels like we're running a sprint, we're actually running a marathon. And if we burn ourselves out way too fast by trying to just sprint out the gates and be perfect immediately, we're going to trip, we're going to fall, and in the worst case, we're going to stop running the race at all. And I didn't even mean to rhyme that, but put me on the next children's book you guys are working on. So all that to say is, like, people want to be excited about this work. This work is exciting. We should be excited. We need to hold each other accountable for continuing to get better, but we shouldn't punish people for not being perfect right at the beginning. And so I don't know if this is the answer both of you expected, but here her Kat and I saying, like, yeah, whatever, greenwash away.
Yes, greenwash away.
Well, thank you both for being on the podcast today. I mean, you both brought a lot of spicy information and topics, and I love that, we're getting a little controversial here, and really bringing more awareness to, some of the myths, I think, about where we've been, where we're going, and what the reality is. And so, one takeaway that you want to leave your audience with, what would you, if they took one thing away, what would it be, Charlie?
It is not wrong to be upset with the state of the world and anxious about the state of the environment, but that does not mean that the work to solve it has to also be anxiety inducing and full of sadness. This should be the moment where we all roll up our sleeves, recognize the great opportunity that we have, unique in human history, to solve one of the world's greatest challenges. And there's so many cool things happening that it should be a joy working on this every single day. That doesn't mean that you can't, of course, feel overwhelmed from time to time. And I certainly feel overwhelmed whenever I read a news headline. But that, don't let that get into the work, because as the moment that sustainability becomes a sad thing to work on, that's not going to get people excited to work on it with you. So that's my last point. I know I wrote a book on climate optimism, but let's be optimistic. How about that?
I love that. Kat, what would be your one takeaway for the audience that you would ask them to take away from today?
I would say you have to understand the people that you're working with and where they are at this moment in this journey. So many of them have not taken a first step, and you really need to understand why, because that's the only way you're going to get them to make that first step. So for me right now, change management in the sustainability space, I'd say coupled with data, those are our two big opportunities. We just need to be really tolerant and accepting of people in order to get them to understand what role that they can play.
And I think everyone, if you're looking for someone who are experts or as close as we're going to get or find in the industry, you need someone to really kind of help champion that. You have Kat. You can also pick up Charlie's book and learn a lot about total ownership. And we'll have all of their links into both of how to contact or reach them and to their books. So thank you both for being on Beyond the Megawatt, and a shout out to our sponsors. This episode was powered by Mod 42 Modular Data Centers, and BCS Switchgear is our title sponsor who keeps our mic hot. So thank you to both of those sponsors, and thank you both, and to my co-host, who is always wonderful to co-host with.
Thank you both so much for having us on.